So my name is Phoenix Goodman. I'm very honored to be up here today. I'm a big fan of the Zeitgeist movement, and it was definitely one of the things going through my career in activism that definitely sparked my interest in trying to change the world. So I had visualized that one day I'd be doing this, and here I am, so that's pretty cool. I was one of the founders of Public Bank Los Angeles and the California Public Banking Alliance. We campaigned successfully to put the public banking option on the ballot in Los Angeles. Sacramento is now moving forward to create a public banking municipal movement across the state. And the reason why that's relevant is because we're trying to democratize finance, move it out of the hands of plutocrats and basically into a socially accountable framework. And I actually have one of my mentors, Ellen Brown, here in the audience, who actually worked on the original Zeitgeist movie, which I just didn't even know until now. So that ended up being a really cool coincidence. So I want to talk to you about something that's a little bit different than the technological and material solutions that we often hear about in these circuits. I think that those are very important. We need to arrange our resources much more rationally. We need to provide the material solutions that make this world a better place. Banking is part of that as well. But today I'm going to go with a little bit different of an angle. I want to talk about the solutions that actually transform human consciousness. It's one thing to provide physically for people, but mental illness, happiness, self-actualization, these are all things that we need to look at and need to focus on transforming, because that's the crux of what gives us our experiences between life and death. So hopefully by the end of this talk, I will prove to you a few things. One, we can absolutely, as a civilization, create a situation in which we proactively make imminent the collective human transcendence. That would lead to making a Da Vinci out of everyone, or at least bringing out everybody's inner Da Vinci. And finally, I want to hopefully show you of hope that that could happen within a relatively short period of time if there's enough political will to do so. So a couple of problems that we need to go through here. Transitional challenges, I want to go over the paradigm of privilege and the culture of cynicism that we have. Transitional challenges. So you've often heard, how is the resource-based economy going to be brought about, right? I'm positing, if you have ever seen this South Park episode, I changed this a little bit. Phase one is this is where we are right now. Phase three is this ultimate end of history where things are figured out and we have abundance for all. But today, if we were to pass or create a motion or have a movement that actually went to Congress and you had to have Republicans and Democrats debating over whether to create new cities and completely transform the rearrangement of resources to adhere to a principle of maximum abundance, do you think that they'd pass the motion right now to get that done? We don't live in the society that will create that society. So we need to transform the consciousness of what we have in order to have the system that will then bring about the system. Who's going to build the cities? Who's going to organize and enforce the organization of resources? Who is going to organize human capital for implementation, implement the laws, and, oppose the regressive counter-revolutionaries who will fight tooth and nail to bring us back to a scarcity paradigm? Here's another problem: is we live in a paradigm of privilege where the many are subjugated by the hegemony of the few, right? So we have intergenerational riches being passed and intergenerational poverty being passed. Oftentimes, people that are privileged don't even realize what it means to be privileged because they're just blind to it, while certain people that have a lot of obstacles ahead of them have a lot of problems in life, which is no fault of their own, and they have just more to overcome. That squanders potential. We've all seen this picture, right? This is what trickle-down theory really looks like. And in a world where a handful of people own almost the vast majority of our wealth, really, in our society, people like this exist. That could have been a Da Vinci. But because society didn't give this individual the resources he needed, not to live only a materially prosperous life, but a psychologically prosperous life. That's what happened. You guys might be familiar with The Prince and the Pauper. I think that's a very telling story. Because imagine if one of you had been born into, say, the Rockefeller family, the Rothschild family, the, Trumps. You would have been able to go to privileged schools, to have been exposed to incredible resources, to achieve all your life dreams, fast track very easily. But imagine if you had been born into one of the lowest, socioeconomical strata that exists. What would you be today? Because I'm sure all of you, on some level, have a bit of luck that you can be grateful for. So why does the pauper even exist? Nobody should be held down because we all have inherent potential, and that's what this talk is about. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Is that better? So privilege, my point is privilege leads to squandered potential. And privilege leads, therefore, to holding back our species, because when potential is squandered, what would have happened if it wasn't squandered? That happens all the time. This is a great quote that brings it up. I'm somehow less interested in the weight and convulsions of Einstein's brain than in the certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. So we need a system that gives every single child, regardless of family background, maximum opportunities to actualize their potential. Another issue is we live in a world of cynicism today. As Peter Joseph so aptly put in the last talk here, this idea that we can rationally organize society is considered utopian. I think that the idea that we have to keep what we have is dystopian, to be honest. So we have a system that's all about next quarter, it's all about next election cycle, it's all about consumption as the highest good, right? Live, consume, die. This scene here from the movie They Live is a perfect example of that. We also live in a world that's hyper-libertarian, right? Freedom for corporations, freedom for plutocrats, freedom for private property owners. So this is the world of neoliberalism, libertarianism, hyper-individualism. Screw everybody but myself and my family. The grand vision in that case is lower my taxes to zero, especially inheritance tax, and consume, and then die. But liberty, right? Freedom, sounds good. So is this why we evolved from single-celled organisms on a planet in space to receive our neocortexes from the evolutionary process and to send people to the moon and develop incredible technologies and theories about the existence or the theories about reality? Is this what we evolved out of in order to live, consume, die? What are we counting down to exactly? What are we leading to? What is the point of this universal game, this process? So I want to go over a few background things that I'd like you to understand, and then we'll go over on how to apply those things. First is the concept of idealism and materialism. I mentioned in the beginning that one of the main issues is that we have a materialist paradigm, where even the well-meaning things that need to change, that are material, we should absolutely go for. We need to rearrange physical resources better. We need to make sure that people have the material comforts to allow them to live prosperous lives. And those are important and absolutely 100% should be addressed. Even the left of the modern kind will want to help raise people's wages, right? These are good. But how do we maximize the intangibles of the human experience? The philosopher Hegel basically brought about an idea of a system that pointed to the evolution of humankind striving towards maximum freedom, and at the end of history, from this long and arduous process, we would arrive at the omega point, right? For example, slavery is no longer as in vogue today as it was hundreds of years ago. Torture's illegal, right? All the freedom fighters from generation to generation grind it out in this dialectical battle. And we are not done with that game. But what is the end of that? So if you guys are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid, I think that this should play a big role in how we look at how to organize society. So I showed here, as you can see on the left, the materialist limit comes up to over the bottom two parts of Maslow's pyramid: safety needs and physiological needs. So when we rearrange resources more intelligently, we are providing for those safety and physiological needs. But what about love and belonging and esteem and self-actualization? Even with UBI, I could be given a check every month. But if I'm mentally ill, what am I going to do with that money if I don't have the support system? So even if you take this growth and this evolution of the human race to the nth degree, there's the materialist version and then the idealist version of that. The materialist version of the evolution of humankind will point to a transhumanist singularity type of endgame, which we augment ourselves with technology to turn ourselves into material gods. That's dangerous, though, if we don't change our actual value system, which no technology or material advancements can ever dent unless we change our culture, our ideas, our values. And that's what leads to the spiritual transcendence. So how do we do that? Well, first let's look at the education system and the state of how that is today. So here's some political cartoons that point to it. Top left, you'll see all that creativity gets churned out into gray. On the right, you have that sausage factory, that machine that churns this out. A bunch of uncritical thinking drones, right? Bottom right, my son lives paycheck to paycheck. Maybe you should get an education. He's a teacher, right? And I think the most relevant for this talk is the one on the bottom left. You have all these different animals, and it says there, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. That's what happens with a standardized approach that turns us into a bunch of drones in a factory model that was born out of the 1800s industrial revolution. So the monkey's going to do really well in that system. The fish is screwed. We need an education system that says, hey, you're a fish. Let's see how we can maximize your swimming capabilities. You get where I'm going with this? There's a spectrum of schools in the world. Imagine the best school in the world, hypothetically. The best. What's that child going to receive? You guys can probably come up with some ideas, right? Tutors, mentorship, extracurriculars, high expectations. What about the worst schools in the world? Worst schools in the US. What are they going to receive? The children of the poor and the underprivileged. And so you have a spectrum of lifestyles. Now, each of those people, remember the Prince and the Pauper? They're all each other. They're the same. They were all newborns at once. If they were switched at birth, they would just be in a different picture. Do you see that? They're not different. They're structurally lucky or unlucky. Therefore, the existence of the very concept of a bad school, the fact that that's a thing, is a system failure. Okay? Therefore, if we're going to talk about the end of history, every single school needs to be completely top quality. So we can already point to some ideas, and I'm not necessarily saying that one of these is the thing, but at least to get our minds moving in the right direction outside of our current paradigm. The Waldorf model, the Montessori model, if you guys are familiar with that, I think is a lot better than the modern education system. I want to point out another really interesting model. It's called SEED. It's a few schools in and there's one in Miami, there's one in Maryland, one in DC, there might be another one. But what they are boarding schools, and they can't take nearly the amount of applicants that they receive. Why? Because the applicants are only from underprivileged schools or from underprivileged areas, okay? So they would go, if they went to the local public school, to a school where the dropout rate is dismal, 40, 50%. Gang-ridden, crime-ridden. Same exact kids, but when they're lucky enough to go into this boarding school system with high expectations, they end up in a system where they have a 98% college graduation rate. Okay? Prince and the Pauper. Just put them in a new situation. And then you have the butterfly effect. What happens after 30 years? The pool of people, right? Somebody that could have used their brilliance to just be an incredible contributor to society might end up using their brilliance to maybe run a gang, right? And then these are some statistics. 94% accepted to four-year college. I can't really see that there, but that's their daily schedule. It's very curated, just like a privileged child's day might be curated. Okay. Another big problem, the theory-practice gap. So here we are in the 21st century. We have decades, if not centuries, of academia accumulating incredible amounts of empirical knowledge about the nature of what makes us tick. We know about personality types. We know about learning styles. We know about pedagogical research. Okay? But they're trapped in the ivory towers. So all this stuff is known by the PhDs, and maybe we as individuals might go and help our own kids with these things, or certain institutes might go and try to apply them, but is it systemically applied? Are we applying this empirical knowledge systemically so that everybody can get maximum cultivation? Every year research is done in the fields of all these things, and none of it's translated into policy. System failure. These are trapped in the ivory towers. Here you have, on the left, the Journal of Pedagogical Research, the Journal of Positive Psychology. These are actual academic journals with empirical evidence, peer-reviewed. Other books like How Children Succeed, empirically based. Abraham Maslow is an example of positive psychology. This is all research-oriented material about what makes humans more self-actualized. And yet we're not self-actualizing our people. It's crazy. So how do we take this from theory into practice? Well, look at this. It's time for an evidence-based society, not only on the material level, but on the ideal. That's with the scientific revolution. Look what happened to world population after that. Why? Because you started to use evidence-based processes in order to transform technology and science. And that's the result within a few hundred years. The result of the first Enlightenment. So what's the result of now providing an evidence-based model to education and politics? Okay? So humans, I hope you believe, are born as newborns with an incredible amount of potential. And when that potential becomes completely actualized, unfortunately, this is the tragedy in our modern society, that is the exception to the rule. They are the outliers. But what if that was the norm? Every baby is a potentially very stable genius. For real. So you guys have heard of positive psychology, right? You guys heard of these seminars like Landmark Forum or Insight Seminar, Silva Method. People spend sometimes thousands of dollars to go to these seminars, right? Tony Robbins. And then it's this curated experience where people are brought to be induced to these epiphanies, right? And through this process, they end up achieving a higher level of self-actualization, overcoming their mental blockages, overcoming the neuroses that was born from childhood trauma and neglect and abuse, reversing that damage, right? Playing janitor to the trauma, and then achieving higher levels of productivity and goal setting as a result. That's positive psychology. And it works. Obviously, people wouldn't spend thousands of dollars if it didn't. So you guys are familiar again with Maslow's hierarchy. The idea is We need to bring everybody to that top of the pyramid. This is a psychological revolution more than a material one. One of my favorite concepts is called ikigai, from the Japanese island of Okinawa. Culturally, what it refers to is the intersection of what the world needs, what you love, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for. And the intersection of all those things is called ikigai. Do you have an ikigai? And so the question then is, can we systemically cultivate self-actualization and ikigai among the entire populace, every single child? And a caveat to that, be careful of the law of attraction and all this self-actualization stuff too, because sometimes it'll say, well, the status quo is great, the modern capitalist system is great, and all you got to do is think positive thoughts, and you'll get rich and get the car you want, and get the diamonds you want, and get the house you want. So be careful not to get too enthralled by the materialist seduction of that. All right. So I told you in the beginning of my talk here that I can prove to you that this is not some pie in the sky thing, and why haven't these utopian ideals been actualized yet, and what's taking so long? So there's a concept called positive liberty I want to talk to you guys about, which is in contrast to negative liberty. Negative liberty being the libertarian, let everybody be dog eat dog type of freedom, as opposed to the type of freedom that's about the system bringing everybody to achieve what they are meant to achieve by creating grand projects. It's a proactive type of freedom that brings everybody to the state that they need to be at. It's about vision, leadership, focus, and will. Right now, we live in a negative liberty world. What grand projects do we do as a society anymore? Except wars, right? And this is why there's a general sense of cynicism. People say, oh, well, all the things that are screwed up are just going to be that way, right? We can't take it on. What's it going to take it on? And that's why we don't have a resource-based economy. It's not going to happen with a handful of people just hoping it will or analyzing it. Realistically, it will take a state massively mobilizing to give the orders to institute the thing. That is how history and society works. That is how reality works. So let's go over some proven models of positive liberty in the history of society. The First French Republic did some really epic things. Within just a handful of years, they overturned an entire feudal and monarchical system. They abolished feudal dues, they confiscated the estates of the aristocracy, converted the population from subjects to citizens. They completely secularized the nation. And yes, they created a new calendar. If you guys think the metric system is more rational than the system we use, they invented the metric system. They also created a year one, which I love. Because they said 1792, 1,792 years from what exactly? Is this the modern age? So they made that year one. I look forward to the next year one. The Meiji Restoration in Japan. In 1868, if you had walked down the streets of Tokyo, it would have been a feudal society. Samurais with swords walking around, peasants. In 1912, if you had walked around, not even, by the 1870s really, if you had walked around Tokyo, you would have seen people in top hats riding on trains. How? Within a short period of time, they decreed that the entire society would be focused on this one mission of abolishing the hereditary privileges, creating universal education. They collected vast knowledge from the West, implemented it, they created a new constitution, and they mass industrialized within decades. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Turkey was in shambles. It was the sick man of Europe, decades behind the rest of Europe. In that context, Ataturk came to power, and they were also very far behind. Intellectually, they were enthralled to church and state being intertwined. Within Ataturk's reign, which was a short period of time relatively, literacy rose from 9 to 33%, completely secularized the nation. He changed the language from Arabic script to Latin script. He implemented a new calendar. He changed the day of rest from Friday to Sunday, right? Massive reforms, completely changed the society. Nobody had a last name in Turkey at that time, created a new system where they did have last names. Mass industrialization, by the time he left office, Turkey was 10 times more industrialized than when he got in there, okay? Short period of time. The New Deal. You guys are probably more familiar with that. It's closer to our history. Massive public works project, transformed the economy, collective bargaining rights, changed the nature of regulating banks, created Social Security. That's what it did on unemployment, and massively industrialized the nation, which led to ultimately the U.S. following World War II being one of the industrial powerhouses. Speaking of which, the World War II war economy, right? Massive program on steroids, right? Buy bonds, conversion of all the factories for the war effort, total mass mobilization, and brought unemployment almost down to zero. The Manhattan Project, right? Peter Joseph talked about the change of technology at a faster rate than our psyches. As Martin Luther King said, we have guided missiles and misguided men. But that happened during this time. Nonetheless, they brought some of the top scientists in the world into the Manhattan Project and put an enormous amount of will and effort and money into this, and then develop this technology. This can be used for good or bad, folks. But nonetheless, I hope this shows you that when society wants to get things done, they can get things done. So we need to stop being cynical and use this type of mobilization for the things that we need to mobilize for. All of these things, by the way, are all within years. The longest was the Meiji Restoration. All these other things are 5, 10, 15 years at most, to understand the nature of how much can change when people have the will to do it. The Apollo program, put a man on the moon, okay? That was NASA spending right before that program as a percentage of GDP. Nonetheless, look at that compared to the Iraq War, okay? Or the bailouts and the Vietnam War. We can do it. Do we have the will? One of my favorite quotes of all time. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. And I edited that because I said, insert anything under go to the moon. We can fill in the blank and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Okay? And the resource-based economy in the future can too be a positive liberty project. Because it is an idealist, rational, grand project to transform the world. Think of it like the Apollo mission. Except rather than the moon, it's the Apollo mission for on Earth. Let's bring the top scientists in the world, the top engineers, put funding towards it, put the will towards it, put the legislation towards it to build the things that need to get built. That is the prerequisite, is the cultural transformation into a positive liberty mindset. How do we get people to think, hey, as a society, we're all in it together, not just looking out for myself? All right? They're not all good. We need to harness our collective vision, but not necessarily for the bad things, because that can happen too. So let's be careful. We need to pick the flowers and leave the weeds. Learn from the best of positive liberty projects, like transforming education and so on, and leave the worst, like building weapons. That's why I quote Martin Luther King. We've come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. All right, so what's the vision now that we have that background? I'll blast through it. Now that you know it can happen if we have the will to do it. Maximum opportunity for every child. So pay attention, this is where it gets juicy. Number one, I'm going to go through some real solutions here. This is not abstract. Every single school should be of the highest quality possible. Orphans and underprivileged children should literally have the same quality education as the top elites of the entire world. Do you understand? No less, because every child matters. What kind of education does that entail? Well, we need a Manhattan Project of the mind. So therefore, we need to put the resources to build armies of counselors and psychologists and mentors and teachers for personalized human development and development of mental health and sanity and happiness and self-actualization. We need to update the curriculum of these schools. Can you read that up there? Yeah, a little bit. Things that we should be teaching are things like mindfulness, interpersonal skills, critical thinking, civics, personal development, even other skills like gardening, right? Computer programming, things like psychology, philosophy, right? We need to transform the mind of the populace and take the current education system, throw it in the trash, and build this from scratch, okay? Every child, just like if you went to the top school in the world where you're paying $50,000 a year for boarding, those kids are going to have access to extracurriculars. Oh, he's good at music. Let's give him some music lessons. Oh, he's good at this skill. Let's give that to him, right? Every child should have access to all of it so we can all find what we're passionate about so we know what to pursue. We need to teach critical thinking and make a population that is unbrainwashable, okay? Because, yeah, if you have this massive education system, obviously people might say, oh, you're going to brainwash the kids. No, we're brainwashing the kids now. What we need is to anti-brainwash them, and that should be an explicit part of the curriculum. There needs to be classes on critical thinking, on propaganda literacy, comparative religious studies, okay? Not this is the truth or else. It's here's everything, come up with your own mind. And, of course, problem-solving skills. You probably know that there's different learning styles that people have, right? Spatial, musical, logical, interpersonal, kinesthetic. Therefore, we need a custom education system that tailors to every individual student's learning style. You guys heard of Myers-Briggs? Okay. You guys know what your Myers-Briggs is? I'm an ENTP. That's why I like to rant on stage. Everybody has different ways of perceiving and interacting with the world. Why are we all going through the same system? That's why some people are naturally good at the current system because maybe they're a little bit more wired that way. Probably an ISTJ is mostly best for this, what we have now. I wasn't a straight A student, but I could have been in a different system. All of you could have been straight A students in a system that was bespoke to your type. Therefore, we need a customized education system based on all these things. Now again, if you're talking about a grand project that puts massive resources and energy into transforming the education system to the apex of what it's capable of, that's the level of the elite level of education, you're gonna have the resources to do this, because what else could be more important other than general survival of the human race? Evolutionary curriculum, we all change as we grow. Therefore, we need to continuously adapt. Every quarter, the army of counselors and psychologists, et cetera, that are giving the children our custom education system should constantly evolve and adapt that system to help continuously guide that child into maximum happiness, self-actualization, and achievement of finding their passion. Tony Robbins, right? Landmark. That's the type of thing that should be applied in the public education system for every child. Because rather than playing janitor and fixing what's screwed up from before, we should give the kids positive reinforcement, confidence-building techniques, teach them how to find meaning, visualization techniques, right? Every child. Children that are underprivileged should have boarding options. People spend incredible amounts of money to send their kids to places like Eton in England, right? Where they disproportionately churn out some of their top, government officials and bankers compared to the rest of the population. Very privileged environment. But if somebody's mother, let's say, is a single mother and she's drug addicted, working 2 jobs, surrounded by gangs in the neighborhood, that kid could be the next Da Vinci. He's not going to be the next Da Vinci, except by an extreme miracle, right? Some outlier situation. So the option for boarding should be available. Because then, just like seed school empirically proves, you end up having much greater results. And if this were available to every single child, if this is what replaced the foster care system, nobody would fall through the cracks. And the dividends that would yield in the future, for the future of society, would be immeasurable. not only morally from helping these children, but what then they would end up providing for society in a feedback. You need a politics designed around this culture. Right now we have a politics designed around money, right? Everything revolves around money. False. When everything revolves around people, that's how we get there. A very interesting example, as a matter of fact, that we can start to learn from is Bhutan. Any of you hear of the country of Bhutan before? A little bit of an obscure country. It's between India and China and near Nepal. They instituted a concept which I think is brilliant. It's called gross national happiness. So they don't only measure GDP, they do measure GDP, but they also measure living standards, psychological well-being, health, how people use their time, education levels, cultural diversity, good governance, community vitality, and ecological resilience based on various factors. They measure those things quantitatively. And then they create a gross national happiness every year. And they are willing to spend money to reduce their GDP to increase their gross national happiness. That is the future of society, if we're gonna do things right. Therefore, we need a new type of social contract, not in which a constitution is simply about the preservation of private property rights, but it should have a mission statement, just like companies have mission statements, to optimize the self-actualization of every single citizen. And it's not all about school, it's transitioning into the world. We need a vast network, a well-organized network of career counseling, planning, internship placement programs. And here's an interesting one. You guys hear about the 10,000-hour rule? You guys know about that? Okay. So it's been proven that somebody can become an absolute expert in their field if they get 10,000 hours of practice. So throw out the whole elementary school, middle school, high school, college paradigm. That's old, in the trash. Now, in the Jewish religion, people have a bar mitzvah when they turn 13 because they pass a certain threshold. Culturally, I think it'd be cool if we had a rite of passage for when somebody actually finds their passion that they want to, that they want to pursue for the rest of their lives. And then the system should provide them the opportunity proactively to develop the 10,000 hours of research and allow every single child to have that opportunity. And also, I think that we should have a central public sector recruiting agency that connects all available jobs with all available upcoming students. We need to collectively optimize the human race. We're not going to change the bell curve because we're all different, right? But what we do need to do is move that entire bell curve to the right, you see? So the collective intelligence should be moved to the right. The collective EQ bell curve should be moved to the right. Human capital, moved to the right. Let's unleash everybody's inner Da Vinci. But what's it gonna cost? All right, here's what we spend money on now. $750 billion for defense, over $100 billion in corporate subsidies. The Department of Education is already $180 billion, that gets rolled over, okay? We're already spending $80 billion on the prison system. You think we're gonna have less prisoners if this gets implemented? Foster care program, replaced, okay? Who knows what we're spending on other crap, like the black budgets, yeah, right, okay. Tax breaks, $1.22 trillion. Offshore tax havens, $458 billion a year. Oh, we can pay for it, all right. We just need to want it. We need to have the positive liberty system that brings us all together and says we are pulling this off, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And of course, these people are the same group of people that are the ones that attend those elite private schools that we're not attending, so that they can have the fast track into the government positions in their secret societies where they connect and give each other insider information. That cabal are the same ones hiding that money. So we just need to rearrange that. One of the most exclusive schools in the world costs $50,000 per year. Interesting, right about what it costs us to pay for a prisoner. Elite private school, boarding. Do you see how ridiculous this is getting? And we have 438,000 foster care children. So privilege is poison, okay? We can blast through this quickly, but these are just some statistics of how bad it is on the human mind, on the human condition to be born into poverty versus high income situation. So we will actually save money on prisons. We will save money on crime. And not only that, but we will have so much more human capital among the population that their contributions will provide dividends that are immeasurable. And I'll also point this out too. Japan, in their Meiji Restoration era, was basically a feudal system. When they got exposed to America and then the rest of Europe, and they realized how far technologically behind they were, and they caught up literally within a few decades, they got inspired because they had to catch up, right? They had to compete. I'll tell you this, that the first society to start developing this, I think would cause a chain reaction. Because their human capital would be so vast, they'd be building starships, I think, within a generation that everybody else would have to start maximizing their own citizens too. Hopefully you end up having a chain reaction. Planet Earth becomes a society that evolves the human consciousness to a place that is so far that we're basically barbaric right now in comparison, right, culturally. So a few basic things. We need a system that is committed to the proactive immanentization of collective transcendence. In other words, let's make everybody their best selves proactively. Think of this as cultivation, maximization. We're perfecting, we're optimizing, right? We're proactively optimizing the human race. All these things, if not completely eliminated, almost completely eliminated. No one should ever have to say, I could have been great at that. No one should ever have to say, if only I'd had the opportunity. Because in this system, no excuses. Fast forward a few generations. Meditate on that for a second. Imagine this is implemented and we fast forward three generations. What will that society be? All right, we live in a system where sons and daughters of royalty, business magnates, celebrities, and other elites are literally guaranteed better resources and opportunities. And what that inherently implies is that we all matter less. So I'm going to leave you with a great example, in my opinion. I think that this is something we can all relate to. Have you guys ever heard of Harry Potter? All right. So you don't need to be a Harry Potter fan or know much about it, but very basic gist of it is you obviously know he goes to a wizarding school. But it starts off where Harry Potter lives with this family who are neglectful, abusive. They suck, right? That's really the bottom line. He's 11 years old. They're not his real family. They don't really care for him, and they're not providing him a nurturing environment. As a matter of fact, he's a second-class citizen in his own home living under the stairs, and he really has dismal prospects going forward. But it's the hero's journey. From there, he gets whisked away by this guy Hagrid, and he goes to Hogwarts, where his life changes. It's a boarding school with enormous opportunities. That then lead to his self-actualization as a result. You know the Sorting Hat? You guys all probably have some kind of an idea about Gryffindor, right? Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin. I'm a Ravenclaw, by the way. We intuitively know that kind of makes sense, right? Remember the Myers-Briggs personality types? What if we all actually applied the house system based on people's inherent abilities and skills and passions and types and learning styles? This is the tweet from J.K. Rowling. There is no tuition fee for Hogwarts. The Ministry of Magic covers the cost of magical education. Right? So, no privilege. That's how we should do it too. And there's Harry at 18 years old, self-actualized after an epic cultivation experience at Hogwarts. So I have a question for you guys. Let's say Hagrid never picked him up. Let's say he stayed under the stairs and he lived with that family until he was 18 and he went to the local school. He came back home, was abused, neglected all throughout his formative years. Who would Harry Potter have been at 18 years old? So, this is the thing, guys. This is the story of countless people all throughout society every single day, okay? Because they are not fortunate enough to be whisked off to Hogwarts. So guys, let's make Hogwarts for everybody and whisk off the underprivileged children so that they can have the experience to find their self-actualization. So I'll leave it with this. Take a moment to meditate on this idea with me. Imagine a society where an orphan or the child of a drug-addicted single parent in a crime-ridden neighborhood is still given maximum opportunities. Imagine a society where every single child completely mattered.